thanks everyone for coming to this month's SDXD event. To tell you a little bit about us, well, we are an organization that meets monthly to connect, learn, and inspire each other. So we recently crossed the 5,500 member line in Meetup, so we're very excited about that. And this event is also hybrid. So since the pandemic, we started doing online events, and now we've transitioned into hybrid events. So we had over 100 attendees register online, and we have close to that right now in Zoom. And our awesome board member Ellie has been hosting everybody and putting them in breakout rooms to like network, much as you guys have done as well. So that's awesome. And so yeah, welcome to Designing in a Neurodiverse World with Efrat and Ben. And before we start this awesome event, I do want to hand it off to our board member James to tell you a little bit about other SDXD stuff.
Thank you. So first off, a huge thanks to our venue sponsor, ServiceNow, the defining enterprise software company of the 21st century. I'd like to welcome Efrat Orkin, Senior Director of Product Design, speak more about the plan.
Am I starting now? Or do I hand it off to you?
You'll start.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. And thanks again to ServiceNow. A little bit about ServiceNow, if you're not familiar. We are a platform company, and our mission is really to make the world of software, and not just software, be the best that it can. Make the world work better for everyone. And when we say it's everyone, it's really around taking processes, digitizing them, and helping people be productive at what they do. And what's great about ServiceNow, and why Ben and I are very excited to be here and talk about this topic, is that we have a set of core values, and these values really enable us to be inclusive, to really talk about these topics that are sometimes taboo in some companies. So we're excited, and yeah, we'll talk a little more. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, speaking of sponsors, if you would like to join the ranks of ServiceNow and be a venue sponsor or provide donations to help us out with food and beverage, please don't hesitate to get in touch. This also wouldn't be possible without our volunteers. Can I get a quick show of hands from our volunteers, former and current? We appreciate you all so much. They help with social media, they help with setup, cleanup, event planning, speaker relations, so much. So if you'd like to get involved, please do connect with us as well. And for the last piece of these opening remarks, at least for me, we are looking for world-class speakers, as always, just like Ben and Efrat. So if you have something you're passionate about, and whether you're a seasoned speaker or you're looking to do your first event, we're more than happy to host you and to support you. So please do get in touch. How do you get in touch? You can find one of us in person. We're on the internet. Here's a QR code to connect with us. And we're also at sdxd.org or on LinkedIn and Google. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll hand it back to Mr. President.
Thanks, James. All right. So yeah, please reach out to us if you're interested in speaking or volunteering or sponsoring. And I did mention that we have a remote board and also the in-person board. So I would just like to thank them really quickly. I did forget about that. So here's our board. Also not possible without everybody there. And again, without our volunteers, we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you guys. All right, so off to the event. Right, so you just had the networking and check-in. We're giving the opening remarks as we speak. And right now, we have the awesome presentation. So we'll also have a small activity, and after that, post-networking. And we're gonna try and do, from here, jump to a nearby brewery. Right now, we have Eureka. So we'll put the address on the screen after the talk. So just stay tuned if you wanna continue after this. It's good SDXD tradition. All right, so without further ado, I would like to hand it off to Ben and Efrat. Thanks so much for having this talk with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So hi, everyone, again. I'm going to introduce myself. I am projecting, so let me know if I'm too loud because I want everyone to hear us. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Efrat Orkin. I'm a senior director, and I lead one of our workflow design teams, which is customer and industry workflow. I have been at ServiceNow for almost 4 years. It's been amazing, and I am very excited to be here today, and thank you all for joining. As a disclaimer, and this is where I'm going to start, this talk is about our personal experiences. We are not medical professionals. We cannot give you official medical advice. And if you have questions or if you want to learn more, we urge you to talk to your medical provider, your HR business partner or HR person, and your work, etc. Ben.
Thank you, Efrat. So hi, my name is Ben Holland-Arlen. I'm a staff product designer here at ServiceNow. I've been here with the company for about 2.5 years. I'm also a person who has ADHD and dyslexia, and also has had struggles with anxiety and depression. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was pretty young, about 6 years old, and ADHD in high school around 14. And playing off of what Efrat was saying about that nonverbal verbal thing, I don't have nonverbal learning, but I'm very verbal, but I have a lot of trouble with writing and reading and math. So it was interesting. By the time I was in middle school, in 6th grade, I had a senior level of college level vocabulary, but I struggled so much with reading and writing in particular. And so it's been a constant struggle my whole life of this like pull that I'm like I excel at certain places, but then I really don't at others. And so through school, it caused this problem where I'd be in like the regular class and I'd be bored. So I'd, act out, be the class clown. And then I get into the more advanced classes and I had so much trouble with the reading and writing. And so it was this constant pull that really was just this horrible frustration. And so obviously now I'm open about being ADHD and dyslexia because I'm talking to a ton of people here, plus a lot more I can't see on the internet. But this is a new thing. I was incredibly closed about this because I felt this stigma. I felt really uncomfortable. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be different. And it wasn't until last year when I had this big project that I was doing alone and I was really struggling at it. And I finally talked to my manager, who was super helpful and helped me get the accommodations, learn more about even though I've had these conditions for a long time, I didn't really understand them. So this last year has been really amazing, learning and growing and seeing all the amazing advantages when you know how to use them. And so I'm going to talk more about that in a bit, but I'm going to pass it back over to Efrat now.
Thanks, Ben. So just covering our agenda a little bit. So we are going to be talking about what is neurodiversity. Ben will talk us through what are some common misconceptions, what are some realities, and then we're going to have a fun exercise, which we're excited about. And finally, we'll discuss this. But as we go through this, again, I want to just level set. I want to make sure you open your minds to just the different ways that people think and that people experience the world. This is a safe space, so I would like you to share your thoughts as we go through this. And again, as mentioned, we are not professionals, so this is our perspective. So a little bit about what is neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is a non-medical term that came about in the mid-1990s by a sociologist, Australian sociologist, that she's also considered neurodiverse, and her family. And she coined this term more from an social equity perspective. This was around raising awareness and inclusion for this topic, because if you think about diversity, you often think about gender, you think about race, but you don't think about the way people think, people feel, people behave. So her way is like, we need to raise the awareness. And we know that people experience the world differently. There's different ways of thinking, there's different ways of learning, behaving, communicating, and it's like a fingerprint, right? So everyone's brain is different, and we need to be able to accept that. And the idea is really to reject the idea that there is no right or normal way of doing things. Like, who wants to be normal between us? Like, come on. And really, we want this to be able to celebrate our differences. Think about them as enrichments and not as deficits. So let's look a little bit at some of the numbers out there. So if you think about it, 20% of the world's population is considered neurodivergent. Now, if you look at this room and you look at numbers overall, left-handed people are 10% of the global world. So think about how many left people you know. There's a lot of left-handed people. That's only 10%. Now think about 20%. So how many people around us that we may know or not know might be neurodivergent? And not only that, we know that in the tech industry, there are way more. And what else is, as we continue to evolve and know more about the brains and the way that we behave, I believe that these numbers will continue and grow. Now, in the workspace, we know, and we've seen it, that when integrating and creating an inclusive environment, and JP Morgan Chase actually had a program to look into this, they saw that those teams, the teams that had neurodivergent folks, were 48% more productive. But even with that, we know that only 4% of companies include differences, different abilities, in their DEI strategy. So again, just something to have in your mind. So let's talk a little bit about what is this umbrella of conditions include. And again, this is not a medical, neurodivergence is not a medical term, but it holds within it all these medical conditions, as we say. So if you think about autism, dyslexia, ADHD, now this is going to be tough for me. Dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, synesthesia, Tourette syndrome, dystonometria, and OCD. Try saying that fast a bunch of times. Those are some of the conditions that we talk about when we talk about neurodivergence. And all of these, they're actually spectrums. So if you think about it, autism, even ADHD, all of these, it's a spectrum, and it is a wide spectrum. And when we think about this, we know that some of these common conditions, they have sort of what we think about them. So especially with autism, because what you think is the stigma that comes around it. And it's the stigma that they are socially awkward, or that they are uncommunicative or obsessive interests. But if you take a moment and think about how will you be inclusive and thinking about these just as different, you can see that, oh, that's why it stopped working.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it lost focus. Hold on, fixing. Try now. Did it work?
You're trying to hide the controls.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Well, I had some other stuff over here.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you think about it, these differences are also great things. If you look at autism as well, as like, you do have great attention to details, deep focus, a divergent way of thinking. All of these things are great things. With ADHD, these folks are extremely creative, energetic, empathetic. So think about it this way. Now, as I said, we have, I've been doing a lot of research, and I've been like collecting a bunch of quotes, and I had a very hard time to figure out which quote I'm going to use. And this one just stuck with me. And this says, this is Jennifer Pontes. She's a writer and a neurodivergent coach. She's neurodivergent herself. And she said, for too long, we've been building a society that tolerates differences rather than celebrating uniqueness. To be different is to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable is to be gloriously alive. And right now, I'm happy to invite Ben over and for him to be extremely vulnerable and tell us his experience. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much, Efrat. So now that we have a kind of base level understanding about what neurodiversity is, I want to talk about some of the things that people often think about when they think about neurodiversity that aren't true or aren't 100% true. I mean, even the name neurodiversity, there's often a stigma. But there's a lot of amazing things. So let's talk about some of the things with the myths and misconceptions. And I have to remember, I have to stay close by because the mic's over here. So I have ADHD and I like to walk around and move, but I'm going to stay here because I can do that. But also, one myth I often hear is people with who are neurodiverse aren't motivated. And this isn't true. What is true is our brains do work differently. For me, I have ADHD and dyslexia. I'm sure you know that by now because I keep saying it, but it's the theme of this talk, so I'm going to talk about it. What is true is my brain works differently. For me, planning and prioritization are really difficult. And so when I have a project, I often don't start it right away. I procrastinate. And then after a while, the deadline, it seems to always get closer. I don't know why this happens. This could be an issue with my time management, but I procrastinate. And so then I start to feel overwhelmed because I know I have this thing to do, but I don't know where to start, which makes me feel anxious, which makes me feel more overwhelmed, which makes me feel more anxious, and so forth and so on, until all of a sudden I've had this project on my plate for 2 weeks, but it isn't until 2 days before, sometimes, let's be realistic, 2 a.m. the day it's due, that I actually start it. And so from an outside perspective, this could totally look like I'm not motivated, I'm not doing the work. Eventually I do it and I get it done, and usually the work quality is pretty good, but it's not in the traditional fashion as someone who has a project, they know they have 2 weeks, they set up, they know it's going to take about 20 hours. So maybe the first week they do 2 hours here, an hour there, so forth and so on. And maybe there's a push at the end, but they're getting the work done. It's showing that the work is getting done. For me, that doesn't always happen. And so it can really, from an outside perspective, make people like me and other people who are neurodiverse look like we're not motivated. We're just differently motivated. For people with ADHD like myself, deadlines motivate us. But it also can burn us out because we put all the pressure to do the work at the end. Another misconception is that neurodiverse people aren't social. This is definitely true, but again, our brains do work different. And so, you know, we might not be social in the way that is more traditional, especially people with autism often have social anxiety as well. And so they might not be able to have like sustained direct eye contact, which from a neurotypical person might be interpreted as rude. But we are definitely social. We're just work in our own ways with our own brains. Another thing you might have heard is that neurodiverse people are disabled. And so this can be true. Some neurodiverse conditions like ADHD and dyslexia are considered a disability according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA for short. But not everyone needs accommodations, and we're certainly not disabled. We're differently abled. And a big one I've heard is that neurodiverse people are mentally ill. And as I talked about earlier, this is true. There is, for me, I have a crossover. I am ADHD and dyslexic, but I also have anxiety and depression. I live on a spectrum, as Efrat was talking about earlier. I have high levels of system thinking. I'm have the ability to see the big picture and create strategies. I'm incredibly imaginative, but I'm also have difficulty with focus. Reading and writing is a challenge, and organizing and thinking in a linear fashion is a constant struggle for me. But I'm my own person with my own set of things going on, because we all are our own latte. We have, as you can see here, we have things that are brewing in time. There's different flavors of neurodivergence. And then on top of it, we have other conditions, as well as just life in general. And then the cherry on top, mental illness. But yes, the laughs say I'm doing good. I'm going to move on. But I will tell you one thing that's absolutely not a myth or misconception. Being open is hard. As I mentioned earlier, I, until last year, had never talked about this. Even that it's me, Ben, here, and I have dyslexia, ADHD, depression, and anxiety, which have caused significant challenges in my life. I didn't want to be open. You know that question when you start a new job, do you have a disability? And there's that checkbox. Never check that box, because it makes me feel like I'm different. And I didn't want to. And so instead, I've always just pretended there was nothing different about me, that I didn't need accommodations. But, no thanks. But the reality is I do. And in the last year, as I mentioned, I finally started to get those accommodations and open up. But even now, even I've done this talk a few times, even now looking at all of you in the room and all of you online, it's incredibly vulnerable. But the other option is no longer an option, which is just to be quiet, pretend nothing's going on. That's a way worse thing I've come to learn. So now that we've talked a bit about misconceptions, I want to switch gears and get to the right slide and talk about the realities of neurodiversity. So one thing I want to talk about is my experience with ADHD. So obviously I can't talk about everything because I don't know about everything. I'm going to talk about what I know, which is ADHD and dyslexia. And so first of all, let's just break it down. There's a few different types of ADHD. The most typical is the hyperactive type. Please hold. More problem solving. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So the most common type, let's start this all again. Let's do it fresh. Okay. So there's three types. There's the hyperactive, the combined, and the inattentive. So the hyperactive is what I think a lot of people, when they think about ADHD, think of. These are the people who are usually diagnosed the earliest because they're in your face. They're running around, they're screaming, they're fidgeting, they're getting up from their seat. They have trouble being quiet. They talk too much. They constantly interrupt. Does this sound familiar, Dad? Yeah, that's my dad. He's visiting. On the other side, you have your inattentive type. And these are the people who are often not diagnosed, especially in women until till later in life. And people with inattentive, these are the people who seem like they have their heads in the clouds. They might kind of seem like space cases, like they're not paying attention. They make careless errors, failing to pay attention and keep on task, not listening. They have trouble understanding instructions, which also sounds like me, which is because it is me. I am the combined type, which is actually also the most common type of ADHD. Surprisingly, the hyperactive type is the least common, even that it's the most in your face and what people often think about when they think about it. And another thing that a lot of people think about when they think about ADHD is that like we're just, these people of it are like constantly just not able to pay attention, like that we're just constantly distracted, but the case is just not true. Look, a squirrel! Oh my God, look, a squirrel! Wow, this is amazing. So this is why everyone's talking about squirrels today. And so if you have ADHD, you might be familiar with this joke that we get distracted easily, look, a squirrel. What may be less known, but is incredibly important, is that when we're interested in a subject, in this case, it's a squirrel, we can hyper focus on a squirrel. And we want to know everything about it. Hey, look, it's me. And I want to know, how they climb trees, how fast they can run, what's the biggest height. And this can be a really awesome skill when properly used. When we're in a hyper focused state, we're able to really just, like the name says, hyper focus. We might not need to sleep, eat, use the restroom even very much. We can just like focus on the task. But the challenge is that while hyper focusing is awesome, there is another side, which is, oh no. Yeah. There's no way that we can just, yeah. Yes. So, okay. So cat's out of the bag, or squirrel's out of the bag, I should say. The other side is hyperfixation, where we become so interested in something, we can't stop. It might be a problem, it might be a video game. And then all of a sudden, Ben here, who's interested in hyperfocusing on squirrels, can't stop, and he just needs to know everything about squirrels. And this is not good, because obviously being that fixated in something can be a real burnout. It's also just like tiring, and we're being busy, but we're not necessarily being very productive. And so, but the question is, why does this happen? What's going on in the brains of people with ADHD that's different? The answer lies in something called executive function. And so executive function is a set of mental skills, things like flexible thinking, planning and prioritizing, time management, which in a neurotypical brain just kind of work. Like I was saying earlier, you got a project, you chunk it up into however long it's going to take, and you just do it. And that's awesome. But like in a brain like mine, you see it's a little bit different story. I mean, it looks super beautiful, it's all these colors, but like it's hazy, things aren't really working as intended. And so like, I won't go through all of these, but I want to tell a story about my working memory, because it works, but it works kind of strangely. So like, ask my friends, I can tell you the most random details about a concert from 20 years ago. But here's what happens when I try to go to work in the morning. I usually have something, maybe like a hoodie or like a book that I need to bring into work. So I have a little table right by my front door. Leave it there. In the morning, I walk out. I go to the car. And then I realize I forgot that. So I go back, get the hoodie, we'll say, go back to the car. Maybe I start even driving. Then I realize I forgot my lunch. So then I come back. Then I like go and leave again. Then I realize I forgot my water bottle. Then I leave, and this time I really leave. I usually go like 2 or 3 blocks, and then I'm like, did I lock the door? So yeah, then I need to go back again and double check that I locked the door. So this is an exhausting morning routine. And it also led to this issue of time management, because I usually would be late to work because I didn't account for this. Now I know that this is a routine. Instead of trying to fix it, I just accept that this is probably going to happen most mornings. So it's super awesome the few days where it doesn't. But I know that if I need to be at work at 9 and it takes half an hour on average to get there, I need to leave at 8:15, which will turn into 8:20, which will turn into 8:25, which eventually will get me to work on time. So now that we kind of have a better understanding of some of the challenges, I want to tell you about some of the amazing gifts when properly harnessed with ADHD. For one thing, We're good problem solvers. We have high levels of creativity and we love to come up with ideas. In fact, I have a problem of coming up with too many ideas. Ask any of my teachers, my wife, just stop with the ideas. There's a lot of ideas. Most of them are bad. Some of them are good, but I got a lot of ideas. I have no shortage of ideas. Anyone need ideas? Just talk to me afterwards. Can't promise they're good ideas, but they are ideas. But we're able to see and look at problems from different perspectives, which allow us to solve problems in different ways, which is why you see a lot of people who have ADHD, as well as dyslexia, who go into fields where they can solve problems like design. Any designers here? Oh, hello. Hello, friends. We're also full of energy and determined. I forgot to put an asterisk here. There should be an asterisk. The asterisk is that only works if we're really interested in something. If we're not full of energy and determined not to do it. That is good. But you give us the right thing to work on, the thing we're really interested in, and we will keep working on it until it's done. We're also risk takers. We often jump before we know where we're going. And that can get us in some trouble. But in my experience, it also has helped me learn, because whether I fail or succeed with the thing I take the risk on, I learn something which helps me build to the next thing. And we're generous and empathetic. People with ADHD are naturally understanding and curious about other points of views, which is an amazing skill to have if you're in a field like research and design, when it's incredibly important that you understand the people that you're designing for. What are their pain points? What are their motivations? What are their challenges? And we're really good at that. So it's awesome. So I want to switch gears now and talk about another condition I have, which is dyslexia.
Hey, Ben, it said dyslexic.
Oh yeah, look at that. It does. So obviously that was on purpose, because when a lot of people think of dyslexia, they think about flipping letters. And that is definitely one of the conditions. Sorry. No way to have the this is killing my executive functioning, having to go between the two. So just bear with me. I want to make sure I'm giving you all the right information. So indeed, switching letters and flipping letters and reversing letters is a condition of dyslexia, but there's a lot more to it. You can have, for me, I have really a lot of trouble reading, especially reading out loud. So as you might have heard, I'm kind of struggling reading these notes. It's also hard for me to read, as well as reading, it's also hard for me to write. It takes me a long time. In fact, for both these things now, as I've gone through this journey of figuring out accommodations and ways to be able to do my best work, knowing that, things like reading and writing are difficult, I now have a computer. I now have the computer read to me most of the time. And I have also a dictation feature, so I can talk to the computer and write by talking. Other things that can be challenging for people with dyslexia include spelling, summarizing a story, trouble learning a foreign language, as well as difficulty doing math word problems. And I can tell you, I don't know if they still do that, but holy shit, back in the day, those trains, a train's leaving from Topeka and going to Wichita at 74 miles an hour, and it got here and it went there. I had no idea what was going on. I did not do well at that, but I really did enjoy making up stories about those trains. And I think my math teacher kind of hated me, but my English teacher kind of liked me for the storytelling. And so another thing that's awesome about dyslexia is that we see the big picture. As we mentioned earlier, we don't think in a linear fashion. We think all over the place, but what starts to happen is that we start to get this holistic picture because we're looking from different perspectives, which allows us to see things differently. We also are really good at seeing patterns. So we're able to see how things connect to form complex systems and identify similarities amongst these things. And this is a really awesome skill, especially like in fields like science and math, where visual representations are key. And we also, as I highlighted earlier, we make great entrepreneurs. People with dyslexia, as well as ADHD, are highly creative, strategic thinkers, have high levels of energy, and love solving problems. A recent study even said that people with ADHD are 300% more likely to start their own business. And John Chambers, the former CEO of Cisco, who's dyslexic himself, believes that 25% of CEOs are dyslexic. And there's also a lot of CEOs and leaders who are ADHD, as well as other neurodiverse conditions. The fact is simple. There are a lot of amazing, successful people who are neurodiverse. So let's check out and see some of these folks. As you can see, this is just a smattering of people through history who have, or, well, obviously the history people, not fully diagnosed, but based on how they acted, it's pretty evident that they most likely had ADHD or dyslexia. So as you can see, in all walks of life, in all fields, there's people who are thinking differently and like totally kicking ass. So to put it bluntly. So let's just highlight a few of these people. One, I'm going to totally butcher his name, but Ingvar Kamprad, who started IKEA. He's also dyslexic. And a lot of the ethos of how IKEA works is because of his dyslexia. So he started thinking differently. He almost went out of business because when IKEA started, they were making furniture like anyone else. You go to a furniture store, you buy the furniture, it'd be delivered and put together. And then things weren't going well. And he had this crazy idea. What if we just like make them, the people buying it, put it together and put it in just flat boxes? And what if we give it weird Swedish sounding names, which was actually done because Ingvar had a really hard time remembering the names of things. Because typically in the back end, when you go and look at a product, it's just a string of letters and numbers. That wasn't working for him. But I'm just going to make up a fake IKEA thing, but the Schlingenschlagen is way easier to remember than DLQQ 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then another thing he famously did was, he has trouble reading. And so instructions are hard. So let's just make them have pictures, which also does another thing, because then you don't have to translate them into other languages. So huge win. Another person who took his own challenges, this is David Nealon, who started JetBlue as well as a few other airlines. He's ADHD. And like many people with ADHD, he had a problem of losing things. And often that thing was his plane ticket to get on the plane. And so he had this idea, what if we could put my ticket on a phone, on a digital device? I have an e-ticket. I won't lose it. And the rest is history. And then you have people here like Greta Thunberg, who has autism, as well as obsessive compulsive disorder and selective mutism. And she calls her diagnosis a superpower and credits her ability to singly focus on the problems she's interested in, and that also allow her to think outside the norm. And so these are just a few examples. Oh, I guess I should also talk about my own personal business hero, Richard Branson, who is ADHD and dyslexic like myself, and dropped out of high school when he was 15 years old because it just wasn't working for him. The next year, he started a magazine business with a friend of his. And then a few years later, started a little company called Virgin. Anyone ever heard of Virgin? So the Virgin Group now controls more than 400 companies worldwide in media, travel, communications, hospitality, and many other industries. But on this day, this was 2007, and I was really struggling. I'd been working for a radio station for about 4 years, and I wasn't really into it that much anymore. And I'd heard about this thing called like the tech thing going on in like San Francisco. And I actually had a friend who wanted me to move out and be her roommate, but I was petrified. It took me a really long time to learn how to do the radio thing. And the idea of starting all over was just making it kind of like I wanted to do it, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't get over that barrier. Then at the after party for a Virgin music festival, I happened to see Richard Branson sitting all alone, drinking tiny bottles of wine, very cheap wine. Sutter Home, I think, which is surprising. And I'm like, dude, you're a multi-billionaire. Why are you drinking horrible wine? But you know, that not going to judge, but I walked over him and we ended up having a great conversation. He's so open and empathetic that I ended up spilling my guts about my own personal situation. And after hearing it, he just looked at me and said, Ben, do it. Fuck it. What's the worst that can happen? And I was at least first a little just what? And then he went on to say, the reason I'm telling you this is because, you know, if I let my neurodiversity, he didn't call it that because in 2007, that wasn't really the word, but if I let the things that made me nervous hold me back, I would never get to where I am. Just try it and see what happens. And as a result, I moved to San Francisco. I got into the tech industry, and now I'm standing in front of you talking at my tech job at ServiceNow. So thanks, Richard. And thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass it back over to Efrat.
Thank you so much, Ben, for being vulnerable. We appreciate you. So now we all get to see how our brain works. So how might we? We will be passing along some paper and pens.
I'll quickly say for folks who are at home, if you have pen and paper, or if you can open up a notepad on your device.
So please spend some time and draw how to make toast. That's the front. You have 3 minutes, starting now. So as you can see, we all have different ways of doing things, different ways of process. Some take long, some take exactly 2 seconds to do it. And this is really what this exercise is about. And this is what neurodivergency is about. It's about if we make the space, if we make the room, if we seek to understand and be open, then great things can happen, like a champagne toast, because I love champagne. Yeah, I'm with you, Ben, like multitasking. So let's think about some of this. So we're, not all of us, but some of us are designers. Some of us might be researchers, QA, engineers, PMs, whatever they may be. We all know about the design thinking process. So as we are all makers, think about how can we use design thinking methods to approach a neurodivergent way of thinking. So in the day-to-day, as with the people that we work, again, seek to understand, build the empathy to the folks around you. As you saw, 20%, that's a lot of people that are around us. Think, how are they experiencing the world? How are they experiencing that deadline that the manager might be talking about, or that presentation is about to happen, or the homework, or the all other things that you need to do? How can you help them? Not enable them, that is very important, and I'm learning that from therapists, but it really is, how do you give them the scaffolding to be successful? Think about, again, when we talk about building empathy, as designers, especially as the researchers, we really are all about like being empathetic, understanding our users. So think about that. Get to know the people on a personal level. Be curious, understand people's experience. One of the things we have, one of the folks that did this talk with us in the past, he has a way to like make everyone feel extremely comfortable. It's Miles, shout out Miles. And he likes to start meetings, for example, with saying, how were you when you were a kid? And that really reveals a ton of stuff about you. So those are some ways that you can get, like, break the ice and get to know people. And think about what are tools that we use that can work for all. Again, not everyone can think on the spot. People may need some time. How can we help them? How can we, in meetings, make room for those people who are not extroverts like me and has no patience and always jumps over people? Luckily, we have Zoom. We have chat in Zoom. That's a great way for people to communicate when they don't feel comfortable to just jump in and talk. Miro, a great collaboration tool. So think about those tools as you're working. And lastly, embrace the difference without judgment. Seek to understand one another. Think about how do we apply this into our design and our product thinking. So there's some great articles that we will share later. But as you think about accessibility, accessibility also talks to the neurodivergent. Think about things like font sizes, predictable patterns. Every time we reinvent, and I know it, I'm a designer. I love reinventing new patterns. I'm like, oh, this is cool. But how do our users feel about that? The predictability is not a bad thing. And remember, your customers or your users, they might also be neurodivergent or neurodiverse. You can use both terms, by the way. We did not say that. So think about that. Okay. And with that, thank you. And you can learn more with this QR code. There's a bunch of links around talks, articles, podcasts, books. There's a ton of material out there. We would love for you to help and continue the conversation. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Internet.
All right, this concludes this SDXD event. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. Please feel free to head out with your lovely toast storyboards and photos. Share them on the social medias. Follow us and find us at SDXD. And thank you so much for being here once again. Have a good night, evening, and dinner and plans and stuff. Good night, everyone.
Have a good night. Thanks for joining.